Hey, folks, greetings from the Offensive Security Group here at Secure IT 360, coming at you with a new episode of the Cyber Threat Perspective. You got myself, Brad, and Mr. Spencer here as well to talk about financial services, specifically talking about cybersecurity challenges that exist in the financial services world. And we'll talk about like what we mean by financial services, but what are those challenges? How do we address them? Some common strategies and approaches and things of that nature. So, I think there are some very unique challenges that exist in the financial services area. And I think we should talk first about our backgrounds because I
Yep.
think that's important for the context here. And so, for those of you that have been listening to the podcast forever, you probably already know this, but for new listeners, I spent almost 20 years in the financial industry. Started out at a relatively large regional bank. That ended up getting purchased by a multinational bank, and I stayed on board with those guys for a couple of years, and then I moved to another regional financial institution. So I've kind of seen every level of bank specifically, because financial institution actually encompasses a lot of things. But I worked in the banking world, and so I've kind of seen everything from like a $10 billion bank to $800 billion bank. So or whatever they ended up being worth. It was some astronomical number that I couldn't put on paper if I had all the time in the world. So
Yep.
tell us a little bit about your background. I think most people know, but because you're by far the most popular
Yeah,
podcaster in the group.
so I really cut my teeth in financial services from an IT security perspective. I got a job in help desk right out of college
Hmm.
at a insurance company, kind of a regional insurance company, kind of like small to mid-size. It was about, I think, $200 million or so insurance company when I left, which is fairly small-ish, small, medium size.
Hmm.
Not the billions of dollars of that you traditionally see in banking.
Right. They're
But that
measured
being,
differently though, right? So like
yeah,
I think
yeah,
like I don't exactly know how it works, but I think it's like overall deposits in the financial world, whereas insurance is like profit maybe. I'm not even sure, dude. So
yeah,
you
something
can't
to do
really
with,
compare. It's apples to oranges
yeah,
comparison.
it's premiums and reserves and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
it is very much apples to oranges. But I cut my teeth in help desk, worked my way up to systems and administration and network administration. That's where I really found a love for Active Directory and internal networks, which makes sense, when you
With what you
uh,
do now, yeah.
with what I do now, which is like dismantle AD and like find all the holes and everything.
I built it,
But
now I tear it apart.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the best way one of the best ways to learn, right? Is to like learn how to break something, is to take it apart, to administer it. So that prepared me really well for pen testing today. But anyways, I spent about 10 years in financial services, from help desk to systems administration, then ultimately security. And I didn't have a team or anything, but I was kind of in charge of security. It was one of those situations where I was the young go-getter, right? I'm like,
Hmm.
there's an open position for security. I'm like, yeah, I want to do that. That sounds cool. But at that time, when I first started doing security, is when New York State DFS cyber regulations came out.
Hmm.
And this was all brand new. This was a new regulation for insurance companies, financial services providers in New York State. And we were one of the first companies or first insurance companies to be audited under the new New York State DFS cyber reg, that 512 or whatever it was called. So we had to spin up policies and procedures and have all things documented. And we had to report to the board and the audit committee. And we had to do all the technical things like vulnerability management, all that stuff, pen testing.
Hmm.
So I got a kind of firsthand experience, kind of trial by fire of a lot of these challenges that we're going to talk about in this podcast that are specific to financial services, but obviously there are similarities with other industries, especially regulated industries.
Yeah.
In particular, I think a lot of this stuff will resonate. But even if you're not in financial services right now and you're listening, right, you're a law firm, IT manager at a law firm, a lot of these themes are going to be consistent. And I think a lot of these things will resonate with you. And hopefully we'll be able to share some insights of how we used to address those issues, how we recommend clients kind of address and tackle those things.
Hmm.
So that's what I hope from this episode.
Love it, man. Love it. So you're right. There are some unique challenges, in this space, and so we're going to talk about that. And I think one of your first points probably resonates really well with a lot of folks, and that is like, I think I know the answer to this, but like, why are they so heavily targeted, right? I mean, because it's kind of obvious, but there's more nuance to it, right?
Yeah, and I think data is the new oil, is the saying, right? Is common to hear. But I wanted to look and did some research and kind of digging, and I looked at the Verizon DBIR. So this year's 2025 Verizon DBIR. And I looked specifically at the financial services industry.
Right.
And interestingly, personal data was among the most sensitive data types that were targeted, in addition to like financial, raw financial data, credit card numbers, payment account information, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So interesting, personal data, payment data are amongst the most highly targeted. And when you think about, particularly when you think about like credit card processing, so if you're a bank or if you're an insurance company, a lot of times you're not going to kind of spin up your own payment processor. You're going to use a third-party payment processor. But there are processes in a bank and an insurance company where those payment processes interact with your systems, and there's opportunities to either intentionally or inadvertently save that data locally to the systems, both while it's processing it and, for archival purposes, for customer service purposes. So there's a lot of this data that's highly sensitive in terms of like payment data that gets saved or is processed by these organizations. And that, as we know, like credit card numbers, payment data is bought and sold on the dark web all day long. And so if I'm a threat actor and I can steal a whole bunch of data, and if it's all in one singular place and I can download 1 million, credit card numbers, I can maybe sell that and, get some money in my pocket, buy a Ferrari or whatever the threat actors are doing nowadays.
Yep. There was one threat actor that did buy a Ferrari, though. That's a true story.
Yeah. So I think the obvious answer for me to start out the discussion is the data, right? And with an insurance company in particular, right, where I come from, there might be health insurance data because of claims. So if you have a claim, even a weather-related claim, like a storm comes through and destroys a house, maybe there are actual people who got injured in that storm.
Right.
Well, that data, the health insurance information, is going to be part of that claim probably. Or a slip and fall at a restaurant. There might be x-rays. There might be information about that person that is protected health information. Mm-hmm. Now you have a lot of compliance and regulatory requirements. You have that health data. You might have payment data. So to your point with the nuance of the data, you initially think the payment data, but then there's all this other stuff that's personal and private information that's also kind of alongside it.
Yeah, and I think both insurance and the banking world are unique in this way, that they have a breadth of valuable information. And so to your point, PHI could be there, but in a banking world, we have not just PII, right? Personally identifiable information. We obviously have financial information, but that information is also multifaceted in how it is used within the organization. So, for example, you don't even have to get financial stuff because we have all their personal information for loans. So we know where they work, we know where they live, we know what their income is, and that's not just, that's not the balance of their bank account, but we have all this other information associated with them that is valuable to the bad guys. And so one of the big challenges that we faced, and this is probably in the 2005, 2006 timeframe, which is really around the time that threat actors really elevated their game with regards to stealing identities. That was kind of at the peak of what an identity was valued at, if you will. And so that means I get the social, I get their other information that I need to like open a line of credit somewhere. Or I just directly compromise their online banking profile. And that's when, all that stuff is going on with the Zeus banking Trojan and stuff like that. So the attackers are coming at us from multiple areas like you're talking about, right? And so we have to protect everything equally. And it's a real challenge, man, because we can't just put this data in a vault and hide it. The client needs to access that. The employees of the bank need to access that. The regulators have access to certain things. And then, like you said, our payment processors, right? We have all these third-party partners. Most organizations don't roll their own online banking. That's pretty rare. And so, and honestly, if they do, it's probably not very good. Let's just be real. And so you're going to go to a Jack Henry, or you're going to go to somebody else, FIS or whoever it is, to get this partnership and get these things. And now all that data just spills over into their environment, and it just gets bigger and bigger. So it's wild, because by contrast, other firms like, look at like critical infrastructure. Like they know what they have to protect, right? If I'm a power station, yeah, I need to protect all of my SCADA stuff. Like, let's just put that on an isolated network where nobody can touch it and we never worry about it again. Yeah,
Yep.
but we have to expose all of this data, and we have to do it securely amongst all of these different recipients of that data. And so it's a real challenge.
Yep. So we covered a little bit about, financial services industry, insurance companies, banks, et cetera, and why they're kind of highly targeted. I think it makes sense to talk about some of the key challenges and kind of some takeaways or some insights that we've had or used or experienced in the past that maybe help with this. This first one, the small IT team, jack of all trades, that one resonates with me because that's where I come from, right? I come from a small company. When I started in IT, I think there was 5 or 6 of us. And then when I left, there was maybe 9 or 10 or 11, something like that. So we grew a little bit while I was there, but I very much came into, the help desk does a lot of things. The systems administrator, the AD admin, network admin did a lot of things. They were troubleshooting applications. They were doing app support. They were upgrading databases. They were deploying new servers. They were deploying new SAN infrastructure. They were upgrading the core switches and the firewalls, like a lot of different disciplines. And on top of it, managing antivirus or EDR or doing vulnerability management, the security stuff as well. So one of the challenges of many financial services industry or companies, because I heard a study the other day, it was like 80% of businesses are like small businesses or something like that, or 80% of businesses in America are SMBs, right?
Yeah, I believe that.
And when you think about what an SMB looks like, you think small IT team, like 5, 6, 7, 10, 12 people in IT, kind of sharing the load and sharing the workload and the challenges. So that's one of the things that I recognize as small IT team, jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing. We kind of you're spread thin, so to speak.
Yep. Oh, you're absolutely right, dude. And so like my first kind of role within the banking industry was actually application deployment. We were using ZenWorks at the time, using a program called WinBatch to like build the deployment tools. And so like I had to know how everything worked. And so I couldn't just like randomly deploy an MSI through, directory services. Like it had to be bundled, and there's certain settings that don't step on other things. And so, yeah, dude, you're absolutely right. And these environments are so large that you can't possibly have enough IT people to cover all this stuff. So everybody's going to wear 6 hats, and I think the adage of like every IT guy is frontline IT security is still true, right? And it always has been. And so, I completely agree with that. But I do think, side note, it made us better hackers, right?
Yeah.
Having to go get our hands on all these different things made us better overall in the security world because we understand how everything works.
Yeah, and I think I think it makes sense to like go through some of the challenges and then talk about addressing those challenges. But one thing is like foreshadowing that I think of is having to be a jack of all trades makes you either have to figure things out or like you find something else to do, right? Like maybe that's not the job for you if you're not going to like try and Google stuff at the time. We just had Google, ChatGPT wasn't out yet.
Yep.
So that learning, being a autodidacte, and a self-learner, having those troubleshooting skills and learning how to troubleshoot things and research things is a very important skill that you learn when you have a small team, because it's like either you do it or somebody on your team does it or it doesn't get done. And that's just how it is.
No, I completely agree with that. And so your next point, I want to jump right into it because I absolutely love it. And it's arguably the biggest elephant in the room, right? And that is the legacy systems and technical debt, right? So, dude, I can't tell you how much of a pain that was. Because we're like core processing. Let's just start there, right? In the financial world, these systems were old, like old. We had probably 4 AS400s, something along those lines.
Power 7s, Power 5s,
Dude,
I-Series
absolutely,
stuff.
man. And old apps too, man. So we're trying to take modern solutions and integrate them with antiquated technology. and trying to glue these things together with duct tape and bubble gum and support, these
Yep.
massive companies that process millions and billions of records, a day and all that. And it's like, guys, what are we doing? And so
Here's a funny question, right? For everybody listening, like raise your hand if you know anyone who can program COBOL without Googling it, right? Like
I
that's the
don't think
world we
most
come
people
from.
could
It's like
spell it.
there's usually like one or two people at these companies that know COBOL, that run these Power 7 systems, let alone know how to like upgrade them, maintain them, patch them, right? Like,
Yeah, dude.
we used to,
So
we used to have to patch the AS400, right? Like it's just like patching Windows.
yes, no, it's not. So all right, a funny story. So we had a pretty robust security team when I ended up leaving the larger bank that I worked at, and so we had one dude named Beck Bryant, and he is like retired on a farm in Tennessee or something now. But this dude was already like 75 years old. And this was in
Yep.
like 20 or this is probably in like 2009 or something, right? And so we kept him on the security team because he was the only dude who
Yeah.
understood how to even connect to the AS400, let alone interact with it in any meaningful way. So
Yep.
he literally sat there 364 days a year and played on the internet
Yep.
because we didn't have anything for him to do. But that one day that we needed him to get on the AS400 for some whatever reason it was, paid his entire salary for the year.
Yep.
And when he left, we were like, well, I guess we just don't do that anymore.
Yep.
It was
And it's-
wild, man.
And it's scary. One of the things that I'll just lament on real quick is while I'm telling stories is one of the scariest things is rebooting an AS400.
Oh man.
Like doing a System 22 or 21, I think they called it,
Mhm.
where you actually turn it off and turn it back on again. Like that is the scariest thing because like that's your core systems. Like that's your core backbone.
If it doesn't come
for a lot
back,
of-
you're done.
Yeah.
You're done.
So yeah, that was a scary moment of like doing operations and having to, or like quarterly operations and having to update the thing and patch it and reboot it. It's like crossing your fingers and doing a ceremonial dance to make sure it comes back on.
You got to sacrifice like an NT 4.0 box to the,
Yeah.
to the ether just to hope it comes back. But and yeah, dude, that all Beck ever did was like set permissions and check permissions.
Yep.
Like that's all he ever did. But I mean, literally, we were like, whatever you need from a salary perspective, to
Yep.
just sit here in case we need you. He was that important to
Yep.
our ability to operate. So,
But yeah, going back to the legacy technical debt stuff, it's not only like the technical debt, right, of those older systems, older applications, older operating systems. It's also like the lack of tribal knowledge too, many times, right? We just did a pen test for a university. They're a relatively new team or a new regime, right? That has come in, and there was a lot of turnover that happened in the IT department, right? People retired. They aged out, they moved on to other jobs, and now there's this new IT team. And a lot of the things, or a handful of things that we find during the pen test are like, we don't have documentation on this. We don't know why it's this way. And that's very common to hear when we do these pen tests and we have these vulnerabilities or these issues. And that's another thing that kind of plays into the legacy technical debt is that lack of tribal knowledge, which is also a form of technical debt, in my opinion.
Of course it is, man. Yeah. And that's, something, and really the situation that I was talking about with the guy with the AS400 is exactly that. It's the same kind of thing. It's like, if he's gone, we'll never find a replacement for him. But it's more than that for the tribal knowledge, right? And so we called it institutional knowledge in the military.
Yep.
Guys that had been to war, had done the things, would come back, and those of us who were climbing the ranks, hoping for the next war or whatever it was, we just soaked up everything we could from those guys. But the problem is, and it works this way in the military and in the civilian world, the problem is when that war is over, we purge them. We get rid of all those guys who had all that institutional knowledge, and then they go, assimilate back into whatever. But, similarly, right, guys that go through like major technical conversions, like acquisitions, those guys know things that are worth more than money. And so, when those guys leave, so does all their knowledge. And it's impossible to do a knowledge transfer. We tried, man. Like we tried to put procedures in place and, like document all the things. It never works. It doesn't, and so, yeah, dude, you're absolutely right. It's a huge challenge. And it's the financial services industry, the salaries are so highly competitive, and it's almost encouraged to a degree to leave one and go to another,
Yep.
right? Because if you want to have a major pay bump, like let's say you're making 50,000 a year and you want to make 70, it's going to take you 10 years at 5% to get from 50 to 70. Or I can go across the street to this other regional bank who's looking for the next level up of engineer,
Yep.
and I can make 70K. And so the system probably inadvertently was built to encourage people to leave and go seek employment elsewhere so that they could climb that, that salary ladder or whatever. And that's unfortunate
Yep.
because it does create a significant loss with regards to institutional knowledge in these organizations. So I think it's a
Yep.
fact of life, but it is absolutely a reality, man, for sure.
Yep. The other thing, and the last key security challenge, I think that is unique to financial services, but not not non-unique to other industries by any means, is the regulatory compliance requirements. We talked a little bit about that at the beginning, and when I shared some of my background with DFS cyber regs. But you have things like PCI. You have, I'm in New York State, so you have the New York State DFS cyber. You have New York State cybersecurity regulations and requirements. You have, like I said, PCI requirements and different levels of PCI requirements, right? You might be small enough to do a self-attestation, or you might have to actually have a full-blown audit or like a certified assessment, right? From a certified SAQ, PCI auditor, right? Stamp of approval. There are different levels to that based on
QSA, I think is what they call it. Yeah.
Yeah, based on like how much, what the volume is of what you're processing for transactions and things like that. So there's a lot of regulatory and compliance pressure as well in the financial services industry, which is different from other industries like the legal industry. They don't have regulatory requirements like that. Their clients do, and their clients put pressure on them from a client requirement standpoint, but they themselves don't necessarily have these like strict regulatory requirements that they have to adhere to. So it does present different challenges for financial services.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And it was something that we spent a not small amount of money and time on, was prepping for Fed audits, doing all of these things and meeting all of those compliance and regulatory. We had like entire departments dedicated solely to that. And so I was kind of fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you want to look at it, but I was not directly involved in a lot of that because we did have those dedicated resources. I was more by extension. Like I had to make sure like the offensive security aspect of what we did met and exceeded those requirements. But yeah, it is unique to this industry. There are obviously compliance regulatory across a lot of other industries, but I don't think anybody would argue with us when we say financial services market vertical is one of the most highly regulated industries out there. Like it is very highly regulated. So,
and that's just private. You think about the public organizations and they have SEC requirements and all sorts of things like that, they have to report incidents and security events and breaches and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
So a lot of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're actually, you actually hit on something that reminded me is like there are a lot of requirements for publicly traded companies.
Yep.
Right. SEC, is it SEC?
SEC is one of them. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we had like individual systems that were like protected in a certain way and had like certain integrity requirements that, like you couldn't even touch those things without going through like this really intensive change control and approval process that went through regulatory review. And so, yeah, a lot of that creates challenges.
And even stuff like, we had an auditor, like an internal audit, but that internal audit didn't report to the CFO. Like that's not how that works, right?
It shouldn't work that way.
They report to the audit committee, right? Which is a separate entity at the organization so that, the CFO can't like sweep under things under the rug or embezzle and, things like that. So there's very unique reporting structures as well. And that kind of ties into Active Directory and access control, right? Because if I'm a manager, and I have audit members or internal audit members, maybe that access control structure or the roles are different for that team or that group of users from other users. So a lot of different things like that too.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So how are we addressing these at a high level? And then I think we're going to deep dive. So
Yeah, so some of the things that I think of, so when it comes to like small IT team, jack of all trades, like we said, I think one of the things that comes to my mind is automation. And automation is kind of like one of those lofty, like buzzword, like fancy things of like just automate it, like it's just easy, right? Um, but for us, we tried to automate things that were high priority in the sense that it would free up a lot of our time to work on other more important projects, things that could be relatively easily scaled or automated that wouldn't break stuff. So maybe it's like verifying backups are kind of writing to the correct location. There's a lot of opportunities for automation with like desktop deployments.
Yeah.
One of the things that I did was there's a certain amount of configuration that we did with new systems. So we would deploy our golden image. We'd have some automation that runs to install our software and all the tools that users need. So that freed up a lot of time because that was the help desk responsibility. So usually a couple times a week, I'd be spending hours a day deploying new systems. Well, we could take that down to maybe an hour a day or 30 minutes a day to just a couple hours a week through automating some of those repetitive tasks. So automation to me is really important. Looking for opportunities to scale things that you do repetitively over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. One of the biggest projects we had was the implementation of MQ. If the listeners are not familiar with that, it's basically just message queuing, but it's an entire architecture of interoperability between applications. And that was a big project that we undertook. I think probably in like 2011 or 2010 or something like that.
Yep.
But it was like an all hands on thing because, to your point, we had 1,500 applications that all did all these various things and all this interaction that occurred, and much of it was manual, which led to problems. Right? What if the dude who does that's sick? Or what if he messes it up, and now the whole downstream system is boogered up? So yeah, so automation it does a couple of things, right? It's more effective, it's more efficient. It also reduces human error.
Yep.
Right. If you do it correctly. So there's a lot of value there in just reducing load overall on IT staff and expertise requirements. So
one of my favorite tools for this is PDQ deploy, which is interestingly being used by ransomware groups now to deploy their ransomware.
Of course it
is. But I used to use it to deploy like registry settings or to push software updates and not having to sneaker net everywhere. So we had one office, one location. We didn't have a distributed office across the country, fortunately. So I could walk down to Susie's computer and push enter. But tools like that you can deploy things across your fleet is really, really helpful. Tools nowadays that are a little bit more sophisticated are things like RMM tools. Like Ninja One is a great example of that. You can do policy-based deployments, and there's a lot of fancy features in a product like Ninja One, where you can automate and manage across devices and do a lot of the heavy lifting and automate, a lot of the boring IT stuff.
Yeah. No, absolutely. One of the things, and we kind of hit on this a little bit already, right? With outsourcing, you're not going to be a large financial services organization without outsourcing a lot of stuff.
Yep.
You just can't do it all in house, man. It's not cost efficient.
Yep.
So yeah, outsourcing is absolutely one of those things. And you also mentioned here too, tool sprawl. And so I kind of have some ideas on that, but I want to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, real quick on outsourcing. One of the things that is great about financial services, they usually have quite a bit of money. Yeah. Especially in the banking world where you came from. I know that like budgets were very available, right? Less so for me and where I came from, but still quite a bit of money to invest in IT and security. So you can use that to like, if you're upgrading a firewall, like hire the vendor that has the expert that can come and help you upgrade your firewall, right? Like don't try to do it yourself. Like bring the expert in, pay them, consult. They do it, they help, you learn, and it's done right. So that's something that I think is important with outsourcing.
No doubt. And there's some challenges with that as well. right?
Yep.
Like you're solving one problem, but now you're creating another. And
Absolutely.
and managing those vendors is often arguably one of the hardest things, right? Because they have to be as secure as you are. Otherwise, you just created a weak link in the chain.
Yep.
So,
But with tool sprawl, I think of, this is like, we have a problem, we need a tool. We have another problem, we need a tool. We have this other problem, we need a tool, as opposed to how can the current tools that we have solve the problems that we have now?
yep.
I don't necessarily think that every problem needs a new solution or a new tool.
Mhm.
And we see this with pen testing and with, security tools, is that we have this security tool, it can do all these things, but we're only using it for like the small subset of use cases. And when we see
Yeah.
organizations, when we pen test an organization that is kind of being resourceful and using all the tools that they have at their disposal properly, or to the fullest extent, we see them kind of overperforming or performing better than their peers in terms of identifying threats, blocking those threats,
Yeah.
et cetera. So that is something I think is really important to consider in the context of like tool sprawl and how you use those tools.
Dude, you nailed it, man. So, I've seen some blue teams at some very small organizations do some amazing stuff with very, very simple tooling. And so I think there is this perception, and it's really prevalent in the financial services world, where like we got to buy the biggest, fattest, most expensive thing we can find. And by the way, it's got to be impressive on the golf course. So like
Yeah.
when my CIO is talking to his CFO buddy on the golf course, like, dude, I just bought this $2 million new tool that's going to be amazing, blah, blah. And it's like, dude, we already had one, like, and we didn't even use it. So, yeah. So use what you have to the fullest extent. And this is something that we tell our clients all the time, right? Because we get this question, like, we'll do a pen test. They might not perform as well as they thought they would. And they're like, okay, what product do you recommend? And it's like, dude, I don't recommend a product at all. Like, why don't you just tune up your EDR? Why don't you just work more closely with your SOC to build more effective detection capabilities
Yep.
inside the environment you already have? So before we go looking for, and it's easy for me to say, I understand that. And I don't know that it's going to resonate at the C level, but before we go buying stuff, let's take a look at our current portfolio and make sure we're maximizing the use of all of those pieces of equipment that we already have.
Yep.
Because I think a lot of people may be surprised that almost nothing in the cybersecurity world is buy and forget. You're going to get back out of it what you put into it.
Yep.
And so if you could buy the best email security gateway in the entire world, and it's going to be garbage if you don't tune
Yep.
it. And it's not a tune once and we're done. It is a constant care and feeding life cycle.
Yep.
Relative to the threats and relative to your IT stack.
Yep.
And so, it's easier to just go spend money on a tool than
Yep.
it is to spend the time, effort, and gain the expertise required to tune the tools that you have. And I understand that. But that is such a
Yep.
common mindset, dude. It really
And it's actually, I would consider it an enterprise risk to rush out and buy a solution that hasn't been properly vetted, or you haven't properly enumerated the reasons why you need that tool, right? Like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? That very much creates risk in the environment. So because now you're distracted, you're spinning up a new tool, you're going through the vetting process, you're distracted, like you said, you're putting time, money, resources into something that you may not get real value from, which detracts from the things that you actually probably should be doing, or the things that are going to provide you more value, provide better security, or whatever the case may be. So all of these things kind of feed into like the enterprise risk, of the organization.
Yeah, no, you're man. Do I have some cool stories about that? I'm not going to do it because we're already like way over time on this, but like, yeah, it's absolutely prevalent,
Yep.
no doubt about it, man.
Yeah, I was thinking we would go into like threats and attack paths, but I know we're already like 30 minutes in.
I know, man.
We've talked about quite a bit. So like we've talked about the why we think financial services is highly targeted. We've talked about some of the key challenges and stuff, and how to address those challenges. So maybe like cutting it here and then doing another episode of like maybe some common attacks at financial services.
I think I could easily talk for another 30 or 45 minutes on just common attacks. So that's fair. Maybe this just became a part one.
Yeah.
And that's totally okay. So, but before we wrap or before we move any further, I do want to talk about, just admin stuff, right? So we don't advertise on this podcast. Everything that we do is just our time putting it in, and it's free information for you guys. So, we are the offensive security arm of Secure IT 360, and we do pen testing. So if that's something that you're interested in, we have lots of other services as well. So I encourage you to check out our website, and if you're looking for pen testing, give us a look. You can go out to offsec.blog/pen testing. We'll include a link down below. Or if you're listening on, I think Spotify is our largest distribution point at this stage, or second by like maybe Apple Podcasts. But yeah, there'll be a link in the description to check it out if that's something that you guys are into. All right, so
especially if you're listening and you're from Australia, we'd love to work with some Australian companies. So that would be the coolest. I mean, the time zone thing would be a little difficult.
Well, so we already have like one of our coolest clients ever is in Australia. And so, yeah, it works out fine because I think our 5 p.m. is their 8 a.m. So, like, yeah. So,
so they're like, what is it, like 12 hours ahead or something?
I have no idea, but I just know they're like, yeah, we can meet at 8 if you can do it 5. And I'm like, let's go, dude. It's totally fine.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, but they're super fun, and we love working with those guys. In fact, I think they onboarded with us as a result of being a listener of the podcast. We did some really cool like statistics, and the US only represents like 40 or 50% of our listener base.
Yeah.
So like we're all over the place in like Western Europe and North Africa. Like it's really cool. So, but yeah, we really appreciate you guys listening. If you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment below. Tell us what topics you're interested in hearing about, right? And you can reach us on offsec.blog. There are lots of ways to contact us. So if there's something you want to hear us talk about, man, we would love to hear that, because we're just rattling off on things that we know and we're comfortable with, but we want to hear from you guys. So we love getting fan mail, which we have been getting a lot of lately. So that's super cool. All right, closing thoughts. So folks, there will be a part 2 to this. So look out for us next week. We will definitely close this topic out with that. Send it away, Spencer.
Yeah, my thinking, like, kind of closing is, a couple things. One is, perfect is the enemy of good, right? Or whatever that saying is. Mm-hmm. And doing something is better than just, overanalyzing things and kind of not doing anything. Yeah. So that's one thing, is even though you have a small team, you might have kind of jack of all trades, you might have some tech debt, you might have some compliance or regulatory pressure. I think it's important just to do things that move the needle, even if small steps every day, working on projects, just little by little will add up over time. Mm-hmm. The second kind of like takeaway that I have is kind of like it's documentation. This is something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, just in my own work and just what I see other people doing, and it's documentation. Imagine if, the IT admin that came before you had documented as much as they could, how much better of a position you'd be in to triage and troubleshoot errors or issues that come up in the environment. So kind of handing that knowledge off, writing it down, documenting it, I think helps not necessarily solve, but helps mitigate some of the downstream impacts of some of these challenges. There's obviously going to be issues no matter what, but documentation, starting small, like, baby steps, crawl, walk, run kind of thing, would be my 2 takeaways.
So I got to tell you, man, you just lost like 1,000 followers on X because nobody likes doing documentation, bro. But here's what I would say. I think you're absolutely onto something. But documentation doesn't have to be this like horrible thing, right? There are tons of tools out there that will assist you in creating documentation.
Yep.
And so like be smart about how you do it. And so I think there's this perception about documentation where it's like, oh, I got to open up a Word doc and spend all this time, writing how I do this and this. And so like, dude, it doesn't have to be like that. There are dictation applications. There are, dude, we got AI now, man. We can do some pretty amazing levels of documentation. In fact, we are internally here at Offensive Security Group are working on a lot of those things to make more robust processes and documentation. So yeah, I'm with you on that. Here's my takeaway, and this is really directed at the management of these financial services organizations. You have a ton of expertise on your staff. Let them help you make decisions. because one of the biggest follies that I saw growing up in the banking world was this dude way up here who's completely removed from the realities of what is going on in the financial institution, in the technical department. They're making arbitrary decisions because they think it's smart. They don't ask anybody, they just do it. And then we have to eat it. Right. And
Yep.
so it creates a ton of animosity. And so listen, man, these guys in the trenches that are out there keeping your systems running every single day, they're incredibly intelligent, and they can offer some really good guidance. And we called it managing up. Right. And I was really fortunate to have really good management in all of my jobs. And so I could go to my boss or his boss and be like, hey, dude, this thing you're doing, it's dumb. Here's why.
Yep.
And if they're honest and they're genuinely good human beings, they will listen to that feedback and they will take it back to the bank, pun intended. So yeah, that's all I got, man. Is just listen to your people. Let these really smart people who are working their butt off for you,
Yep.
let them help you make good decisions inside your organization, because they will absolutely love it. They want to help you. That's why they're there. And so let them do that.
Well said.
All right, folks, that's all we have time for today. Thank you for listening and or watching. If you enjoyed it, please share with your friends, like, subscribe, all the crazy things we ask you to do in every episode, and we'll see you next week.